Dana from MadeEveryday.com. Today we're gonna make one of my favorite projects. We're gonna sew some cute little animal pillows, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 6. As much as I love sewing practical things, I also love sewing things that are just cute and fun to make, to go on a bed, to go on a chair. And the pattern that I'm using for these is called Bonbon Pets. You can find it on my website. Go to MadeEveryday.com and look for the Bonbon Pets. This particular version of the pattern comes with 4 animals. There is the kitty cat with a mini size. We've got the llama family. I love this big size. I mean, how fun is that? We've got bunnies, and we've got the little koalas, and the big koalas. I love making these. In fact, I've made quite a few, as you can tell. So here's what you need. Fabric, stuffing, embroidery floss, and felt. What I really love about this project is that it is a total choose your own adventure with all of the pieces that come together to make your little bonbon pet. And we are going to make the cat today because I love cats. I've already printed my pattern piece, which is 2 pieces of paper that I taped together in the middle. I've cut out the size that we're making. Now for the body, we're going to use a quilting cotton. You could use other fabrics. You could try a faux fur or something fun like that. I'm using some fabrics from my new collection called Butterscotch with Figo fabrics. And I have found that using a smaller scale print, such as this like Starlight one we're gonna use, works a little better with these tiny little pets. You can see how the print looks right here. And this comes in 4 colors, which means I might need to make a whole family of cats, right? Okay, so we've got our fabric for our body. Then all of the facial features that we're going to do are cut out of felt, which is awesome to use. Felt doesn't fray at the edges, so that makes it really easy to sew on top. And you can find felt on the bolt or in these nice little pre-cut squares at your craft shop and a fabric shop. There are so many fun colors, and often I, as you can tell, just buy every color so that I have options. And I have a big stack of all my scraps here because you just need a little bit for the eyes, the ears. And I have found that often I will cut out what I think I want to use, and then I lay it on my fabric and decide, oh, that's not quite right, try a different color, and then I have all these extra ears and eyes hanging around for my next pet that I'm gonna make. So, got your felt. Then you also are going to need some embroidery floss, and that's gonna be used for the whiskers. And on other pets, you might wanna sew additionally, hand sew around the ears, add some little stitches. Again, choose your own adventure, make it as exciting as you want. All right, we've got all of our supplies. Let's cut out our face. Okay, I have 2 layers of fabric here because we want a front and a back to our little cat. I'm gonna take my pattern piece, lay it right on top. And in this case, I like to actually trace around my pattern piece rather than just freehand cutting it out. As far as tracing, you can get fabric markers that are great. They often disappear over time or with heat, or you can just use a normal old pen. Just do what works for you. You're not gonna see these lines as I'm tracing around. And then I just like to go right around it. I'm using the same fabric for my front and back on my pet, but you could try 2 different fabrics. Just have lots of fun. This is a really just creatively fun project. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna cut this out. And I really love this whole collection of fabrics, Butterscotch. It's got a cool mid-century kind of throwback vibe. It was actually inspired by my grandma's house growing up, her fun wallpapers, the shag carpet, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of makes me happy collection. Okay, we've got our cat, whoops, our cat face there. Put that aside, and then we're gonna cut out all the facial features. I've already cut those little pieces out from my pattern that I printed. And I've got all my scraps of felt here, and I have actually cut those pieces out, but I wanna show you how I did that because sometimes it can be hard to cut an exact circle out of felt. So place that on there. Again, I'm going to trace it. I'm just using a ballpoint pen. I often like to use a thin Sharpie, And if you're using a really dark fabric, sometimes that can be a little difficult to trace. You could use a chalk, a pencil. Sometimes I still use a Sharpie, even on black or navy felt, and sometimes I can still see enough to cut it out. I can see where that line is. Okay, so I've got it traced right there. Then you just wanna keep moving it and being smooth. And I know this sounds so like cutting 101, but I understand that it can be hard sometimes to really cut a nice smooth circle. And when I'm all done, if it still doesn't look totally circular, I just go back and keep lightly cutting around certain spots. That looks pretty good, but I might go back and just kind of lightly cut some of those areas, like that. Okay, another way that you could do it is you could not trace it. Let me cut a bigger piece here. You could just cut it out as you're holding it on. That's sometimes how I do dark pieces of felt when I'm cutting. And just keep going all the way around, and I find that that works pretty good. So there you go, 2 different ways to cut out your felt pieces, or if you're doing the triangle, I mean, you get the idea. Just line it up with the edge here. Triangles are really easy to cut. Okay, so there you go. We've got all of our face pieces here. Now let's place a few markings onto our fabric. We want to look at our cat face here, and let me pull these out. There we go. Okay, the first thing we want to do is on the bottom here is where we are going to leave an opening so that we can stuff the cat at the end. So we want to mark that on our fabric, and I'm going to mark it on the right side of my fabric. Just place a little mark right there and right there, and that's going to be hidden in the seam. Do the same thing on the back piece. Okay. And then we are going to start by sewing the whiskers in place. So I'm going to mark where that center point is, and I'm just using my finger like that, lifting it up and placing a mark. Let me turn it this way. Placing a mark right there in the middle point. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the whiskers so that I know how far out where the end points are for each of those. If you're nervous about using one of these kind of markers, let's use a fabric marker in case you make any mistakes. We can make it disappear. So again, I'm just kind of looking right here, pulling this up and marking where the end of those whiskers are. And the nice thing about this too is that it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, I've sewn some of my cats where the whiskers are kind of going not totally straight, and that's just like all of us, right? We're not all perfect and symmetrical. We have unique things about our whiskers. Okay. There we go. So I've got my points and my center point. Now let's grab our embroidery floss. I have my embroidery floss here, and I'm gonna use the whole thickness of the strand. And I've folded it in half here, which makes it really easy to get into your needle. I'm using a heavier tapestry needle, and I find that if you just get a tiny bit of the thread here at the end, you can, with your fingernail, just push it right through the needle like that and pull it through. It's pretty easy. And then I'm gonna double strand this. We're double stranding it. That's how we do it here. There we go. Tie a knot in the end here. And the way that I like to do my cat whiskers is I like to do one long stitch that makes each whisker. You can do it where you sew little individual stitches like that. It's just your preference and what you think is cute. If you're worried about this getting pulled or anything like that, do smaller stitches. Okay, and then you probably can't see my dots since they're so tiny and easy to disappear, but I'm gonna start on the top outside one, and I'm coming up through the bottom here, right into that dot that I had marked. Pull it, and then I'm gonna go to the center point, and I'm not gonna go into the exact center point every time because then I would end up with a giant knot underneath. So I'm just gonna go kind of near it or around it. Going down in there, pulling my first whisker, And it kind of helps to, don't worry if it's pulling the fabric up a little like that. That actually is good. It means that when you're done and you get the stuffing inside, it's going to be nice and taut or tight, however you want to say it. Okay, and now I'm going to come back up with a small stitch just next to that. There we go. Pull that. Now I'm going to go to the outside here to make my longer whisker. There we go, 2 whiskers so far. Then I'll come down to the third one here. Okay, and back into the middle. All right, okay, we've got one side of whiskers. Now my thread is, I don't think I'll make the other whiskers with this, so I'm gonna tie this off. And we'll do the same thing for the other side of the cat. Okay, we've got our whiskers in place. That looks great. Now we're gonna put the nose on. Turn this around so I can see. And the nose covers up that center area where we kind of went down and around. So place that right on top. And let's pin that in place. There we go. Then I'm gonna use my pattern and just gauge where the other things go. So I can place this on top, grab my eyeballs, and kind of look underneath. Place that right there. Place this one right here. And then I find that what is best is to just use your eyeballs to look and see how it looks. Follow the pattern, but then also just judge by what you're making. Does that look right? And you know, there have been times where I've sewn things on and I've gone back and taken it off and moved it just because it didn't feel quite right to me. So just use your instinct. Okay, so I'm placing these with some pins. And you could also use maybe a tiny dab of glue or just find what works for you. I'm not gonna sew over these pins. These are just placeholders. Okay, I feel like that looks pretty good and in place. Let me test it with my pattern piece again, just to see if I'm in the ballpark. Yep, that looks pretty good. Maybe this one needs to go over a tiny bit. Okay, now we're gonna do the ears. And we're just gonna do the outer ear first. How far down should that go? Okay, that looks pretty good. Place that. And after we sew the outer ear, and if you only wanna do one ear, just do one ear. I think the 2 looks cute because it adds a little more dimension. After we sew the outer one, then we'll go and place the inner one on. And keep in mind as you're placing these things on here that you will have a seam allowance that is going to cut into this. So don't put your ears too far out and then you sew and it's stuck in your seam. So remember that as you're putting these on. Okay, let's gauge it on here. That looks pretty good. Okay, we're ready to go to our sewing machine. Grab some thread that is going to coordinate well with your features. I find that colors that match are a little better than contrasting colors in this instance. So that will work well. And then maybe, let's see if this brownish color, yes, that'll work for the eyes. Okay, so thread your machine. And in the bottom, I'm just using white because it's on the back. And I'm just threading, just follow along your guidelines. Something I do love on this machine though, and I know I'm always talking about it, is my automatic needle threader, which just press this button here and it threads for me, which is really helpful when you're changing threads a few different times. Okay, we are going to start with our eyes. Place that down there, remove my pin, do a back stitch. Now, because this is a circle, you don't want to go too fast, and I can actually adjust my speed here if I need to, because you just want to take small little stitches here and frequently lift your presser foot, pivot, and just take your time, go slowly. The fact that we're using a thread color that coordinates with the felt really helps so that if you have any, you know, not so curved looking stitches, it kind of is hidden. And if you sew with a knee lift, which many baby lock machines come with those, this is a great time to use that, and you can use your knee to just lift your presser foot as you shimmy and pivot around. Do a back stitch and then go to the other eye. Okay, we're done sewing the eyes. I'm gonna trim off all those little threads, and then we're gonna switch thread colors to our fun blush pink color. And I know that can feel kind of tedious to be changing threads and doing that stuff, but it's all for the love of sewing, right? That's what my baby lock tells me. I love sewing on my baby lock. Now we're gonna sew around the nose, and then we're gonna sew the outer ears, and then we'll put the inner ear on and sew those. Okay, we're done sewing all of the facial features. Now, one last thing we're gonna do in our machine here is remember those 2 points that we marked at the beginning, the opening where we're gonna stuff it? We are gonna sew a preparatory stitch for later. We're gonna sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance right along that curve there on the front and on the back piece. And that's really gonna help as we're trying to pull those 2 seams together at the end. It makes it a lot easier to hand stitch it. Okay, then I'm stopping right at this mark right here. Cut my threads and do the same thing on the other piece. Okay, now let's go press this with our iron and then piece it together. Okay, now the stitch that we just sewed, that's kind of a marking stitch, and that's gonna help us press in this step right here. Just fold it under like that to where I see that stitch line and press that in place. I love little tricks that really help in a later step, and that's what this one is. Press that in place and do the same thing on the other piece. And then when we sew the whole thing together and we turn it right side out, this little creased area, this little memory crease, is going to just naturally pull in and help us to stitch the bottom together. Okay, let's move this out of the way. Then we're gonna take our 2 pieces and lay them right on top of each other. Match everything up. Pin it together. Just make sure that both pieces are getting to the edges, because sometimes with the felt underneath, adding that 3-dimensional aspect to it, it can make it feel like the pieces are shifted a little. Okay, and then remember, we are not going to sew in that space there. That is our gap for stuffing our cat. That sounds funny. Stuffing our pillow. Okay, we'll go back to our machine and sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around, except for the gap. When you're getting to the end of the ear here, make sure you go far enough that when you turn it, you're still at the same seam allowance. See, I didn't quite go far enough. Let's go back and do one more stitch. It's hard to eyeball sometimes because it feels like you've gone too far, but I'm always surprised that I need to go further than I think. So now I've got that same seam allowance there. Okay, now we're going to trim down this seam allowance just a little bit. And I prefer that in this project rather than clipping into these curves, because I think in this particular instance, it just works a little bit better. So I am cutting this at about a 1/8 inch seam allowance. You definitely don't want to cut into your stitching, but just get it in there. And in some of these spots, like in these ears right here, you might want to just clip into that area. That might help it lay a little bit nicer when we turn it right side out. Okay, now comes the fun part. Let's see how we did here. And you really want to get those ears poked out with your finger, with the chopstick, with a turning, sewing gadget, proper term that I don't know. Okay. And get your hand in there and kind of go along the curved areas so that those look really nice. There we go. Look at our cat. Okay, time to put our stuffing inside. Okay, here's our cute little cat face. We just need to give it some three-dimensional stuffing. I am using this FLOSS polyester kind of stuffing, and one bag like this can do about 2 to 3 of these little pets depending on what size you're making. So just grab some stuffing, go right in this hole, and this hole should be big enough to get your hand through it. The key to the stuffing is to make sure that you just keep stuffing it. Push it into all the little crevices, up into the ears, and just when you think you've stuffed it enough, you add a little bit more. Even at the end when we start sewing it together, the end's closed, the opening closed, we're gonna keep adding little bits as we go. And you don't have to do that. You could make yours less stuffed. Again, it's your adventure, not mine. But I do find that that gives it a really nice shape when you make it extra stuffed. Okay, that might be good enough for us to start hand sewing. You really wanna also make sure it gets into these, they're not corners, but those curves right there, because that will really give it that nice curved shape at the bottom there. Okay, well, let's add a little more, just for good measure. Okay, that'll do. Now, I have a needle and thread here, just a standard sewing needle. I've already threaded my needle. If you need help with that, I have another video on my channel for how to thread a needle. And I'm going to take a little binder clip here. You could use pins also, but what I like to do so that I make sure I don't get this kind of off and I end up with too much fabric on one side is I like to bring it together in the middle, place this little binder clip, and then I'll sew to the halfway point. We'll put in more stuffing and then we'll keep sewing. So as you can see, where we press those little edges under, kind of helps us to bring these two opening pieces together. And you can use whatever stitch you want here. I just like to use a really simple stitch. And so I just go in there, make sure that my end is hidden inside. And then I guess you could use a whip stitch, you could use a blanket stitch. If you want to use something that hides in the seam, that's fine. I find that this is just really easy and quick to do on the bottom. Okay, so I'm just taking a stitch and I'm just barely grabbing little bits of the fabric so that it's not making a big seam on the bottom there. And you can see some of my stitching here from that stitch that we memory creased earlier. Typically, I would have sewn that with a white thread so that that blends in so that you can't see it. But mine is pink so that you could see where that line was. So if that bothers you, you could take that out with a little seam ripper, or you could tuck the fabric in a little more. Okay, now that I'm approaching this center point, I'm gonna take off this little binder clip, and then you can see how this is kind of dented in right there. That means time for more stuffing. So just put that in, get nice and full. Okay, let's bring this together. There we go. And keep sewing down. I kind of love that this project has a few hand sewing elements because there's something different about just sewing with your hands without a machine. It's kind of therapeutic maybe, I don't know. It's just like the slow pace of it. I really like that. And on some of the other pets, I've added those embroidery features around the ears or around the eyes, different things like that. And I think it adds a really cute handmade touch. When you give these to gifts, when you give these as gifts to people, it's fun to have some handmade looking elements like that. Okay, I'm getting closer to the end here. I'll move my hand in just a moment so you can see. There we go. A little bit of space, stuff more in. Oh, in fact, I could put a lot more in that crevice right there. This really is the key right here, is continuing to add even till the very end when you can just barely poke your finger through. Just feeling all that stuff. Okay, that's looking good. Let's stitch this little last bit up. Here we go, last stitch. Okay, let's tie a little knot in this. Go around, go through your thread. Let's do that a couple times. And cut this off. Set this aside. Let's see how our cat looks. Aww, meow, that's so cute. And even cuter with the whole family of cats. Here we go. I think I need about 5 more mini ones. We'll see. Super cute. I hope you guys love sewing with this pattern. You can check it out again on my website. Go to madeeveryday.com, look for the Bonbon Pets, and have fun sewing. For all of your sewing machine needs, you can also check out babylock.com, where it's all for the love of sewing. I'll see you next time.